So I just want to welcome our panel working with government. We've got Sabrina Kunz, Bill Walker, John Berry and Kylie now as our surprise special guest on the end there, CEO of IBA. And as always, please pop any questions through the app and I'll be keeping an eye for the end. Over to you, Sabrina.
Hi everyone, thanks for seeing it through to the end today. So we're here to talk about working with government, and all of you sat through the Bernard Salt discussion this morning, really talking about why beer, and in particular beer manufacturing businesses, are so important for the Australian economy. And because we're so disparate, we really wanted to talk about why it's important and what we can gain from having state-based strategies. So we've got Bill here from Queensland, John here from WA, who are at different stages of developing their strategies, and then Kylie to provide an update on everyone else. Now, we're a really small crowd, so if anybody wants to weigh in, has anything they want to say, any ideas, just put your hand up. We're happy to be...
move a bit closer.
Maybe come in here, in this quadrant here.
Let's get cosy.
Yeah,
yes.
Gather in here, it's two.
Why are they not here? Kylie, I think it was a scheduling issue, wasn't it? Yeah, it's a scheduling issue. So Kylie's got all the updates for the New South Wales government, which is why she's kindly jumped on the panel. Oh, guys, this is so cute.
Now it looks like a big audience.
I love it.
Oh, I feel like so, Bill, I thought we might start with you because Queensland was one of the first states to create a craft brewing strategy back in 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could tell us why your government thought it was important to get involved with craft beer.
Okay, there's a few reasons. One, because that was really when the craft brewing industry was taking off in Queensland, but probably the biggest catalyst was brewdogs. And the Queensland government put a package together to assist brewdogs to locate in Queensland. And then full due, David Kitchen, who's many of you may know, hit my minister up at the time, who was Cameron Dick, and said, "You're supporting a foreign-owned brewery, what about the local breweries?" And
Yep.
Cameron Dick, give him his due, went, "That's fair enough." And before we knew it, we were doing a craft brewing strategy. But the interesting thing, although you could argue there was kind of a political driver behind it, well, there's a political driver behind everything government does, but once we got under the skin of the industry and looked at it and looked at the growth that had been happening, the jobs it was creating, jobs are always front and centre with particularly the Queensland government, and the way it value added to local product, agricultural product. So the maltings that were here, we found that it was actually a very dynamic industry and one that was well worthy of support.
Okay. And John, you guys have just started, you've done the first rounds of consultation with the industry, so that's sort of starting in 2023. Why now? Why did you guys think it was important?
Well, similar to Bill, the regional development outcomes are really important as well with the jobs growth. We've done a lot of work and I should say I sit in what's called, is in the agriculture and food portfolio, so different to Bill in the sort of jobs manufacturing, but we saw just a huge opportunity for the sort of the value adding, if you like, to our grains. Western Australia is known well for its mining and resources. It's something like 250 billion of state gross product goes out of Western Australia in mining and resources. Agriculture is something like about 13 billion. But of that 13 billion, it just goes out. It's grown and just exported out. So we've got grains like wheat, oats, barley, all just gets grown and exported. So the government sort of talked about what can we do to try and help value adding to that grain. You look at countries like Scotland. If I have a bottle of, that's a small bottle, obviously a bottle of whiskey sells in what BWS or Dan Murphy's for about $40. A bottle of grain goes for 25 cents. So the Scotch whisky industry is worth 6.8 billion. Yeah. Our grain industry is worth 2.8 billion. So you look at the value adding to things like beverages, it can be huge for a country and for a state. So our government's put funding in through what we call royalties for regions, which is 2% of our royalties goes to regional development in Western Australia, which is fantastic. It's about $2 billion per year. So they've siphoned some of that money off to say, hey, we can't rely on mining and resources forever. We've got to make a start in terms of value adding. So we're the second smallest, second to Tasmania, in terms of exporting food and packaged food and beverage manufactured products. So, and we're a big state, you know, we've got a very wealthy state, done well through COVID, come out with a budget surplus. So we're in a great position to say, hey, we've got a pristine growing environment, we've got good labour resources, we're close to Southeast Asia. You know, why don't we start to really look seriously at food and beverage manufacturing? And why craft beer? You know what, out of all our industries, I just see that the sense of collaboration. You see it here today, you know, with the conference. We've got Andy Scade from the WA Brewers Association in the audience. We met with Andy, that we have they have a conference once a year. So we started to sponsor that. A big part of what we were already doing in our food and beverage program that we run at the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development is to do capability building. We're doing things like food and beverage guides. We have grant programs, financial assistance vouchers to help with expertise. But part of the, where there's an industry group that's working closely together, it's a lot easier to do strategy work rather than people with disparate groups fighting amongst each other. We just found the brewers really fantastic to work with, and that really helped us along.
Well, we're definitely looking forward to the WA beer industry getting some of that $2 billion surplus. I think we'd be happy with some of that. Kylie, you're here representing the IBA and, of course, the other states, but the IBA is a national body. Why are state-based strategies so important?
I think, Sabrina, the IBA hadn't really gone down this rabbit hole in the past, but because of my background and working for government, I understand how important it is when you're on a policy or a strategy radar, the benefits that come from that. And so I started 3 years ago talking to all the states in some way, shape and form about support for beer and the benefits that can come from growing that sector. You know, we all heard Rich talk about this morning that the jobs, the economic spin-offs, the visitor economy that we benefit, and so those are messages that resonate well with government. And it meant that while we're working on that national plan that we knew was not going to take 5 minutes, that it was worthwhile working at a state level as well, particularly given licensing, regulation, policy and other issues that we had to deal with in an ad hoc way.
And I want to come back to each of you, Bill and John, and you can let us know where the consultations are up to currently. But Kylie, just for the other states and territories, sort of where are we at when we look at across Australia in terms of state and territory strategies?
So when 3 years ago, we had New South Wales and Queensland in place. Now, thanks to, you know, really hard work and advocacy by John, Western Australia is coming along well. Tasmania, we're working in a different way. The Department of State Growth have taken on ownership of our industry. We are the Bill and the John in Tassie has literally much easier in Tasmania, but got in a car and visited and sat down with every single brewery to understand the opportunities and the challenges that are associated with our industry. There's a tricky little bit of history to do with some funding that went to the industry a few years ago, so we wanted to make sure we really did it properly and well. And so we're looking at the minute, waiting for an outcome of an announcement potentially of a craft strategy in Tasmania. We work slightly differently in Victoria in that we have something called the Victorian Drinks Alliance, so spirits, wine, beer and cider, the national or the state bodies all work together, and we've received to date in 2 years now $4.2 million worth of funding to encourage venues to have Victorian products on their menus. The benefit of that is similarly to Western Australia, that's owned by the Department of Agriculture. And so through that relationship, we're now working on a bespoke and dedicated plan for Victoria for independent craft. that advocacy has also led to the State Treasurer doing some advocacy on a federal level for us, given we've got Labor governments all over the country now. So we're trying to use that leverage of getting some help with the feds via our relationships with the states. South Australia, very hard. I hate to say, but it is tough, but we're still pushing through.
So, and maybe Kylie, I'll come back to you in a second, but Bill, so with the strategy in place now for sort of 5 years, what do you think has been the biggest win for Queensland? What's been the thing that you think has been the most successful so far out of that strategy?
I think out of the strategy, probably the biggest win would have been the Certificate 3 in brewing. There's been 88 students have gone through, graduated. They've pretty much all got jobs. Not all in Queensland. They're as far afield as Alice Springs. But I think there is an ongoing issue in terms of skills within the industry and that entry-level skills. As I was talking on our stand earlier to a person who'd mentioned that they couldn't get into the Ballarat course because the costs, etc. That having an intermediate or an entry sort of Cert 3 is something that they've really looked forward to and is really benefiting the industry. So I think that's probably the biggest success. The changes we brought in with the artisan licence have been, we did a survey of the industry recently. Probably a disappointing response rate. Kylie and I were talking about that the other day, but 75 point something % of the industry welcomed the artisan licence, so it was good. But there are areas that we feel we can improve on, and at the moment we've had an initial discussion with the Artisan Liquor Advisory Group that we set up. We're working with them to bring some further initiatives into to enhance the strategy as it is at the moment.
And so you're, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Queensland Government has done a first round of consultation on sort of updating the strategy for the future. Are you able to tell us sort of where that's landed or what we might expect out the other side? Yeah,
I think there are a couple of focuses in it, a couple of things. One, you're talking about the Drinks Alliance. Yeah, we're making a greater focus on artisan liquor, so bringing in distillers as well as brewers. There were elements of that in the existing strategy. The artisan licence I mentioned covers both brewers and distillers. But probably our biggest aspect will be looking at greater market access, particularly through tourism, destination tourism.
Yep.
And working with, we had Matt Braun earlier in the session, working with Tourism Events Queensland to get brewers and distillers onto tourist trails, to get brewers and distillers talking to tourism operators so that they're front of mind, and targeting tourism offerings.
Yep.
Built on brewing and distilling.
And so I don't want to put you on the spot, Bill, but we're here with people who make beer and brewers, and so and artisan, and we're increasingly finding sort of in a whole host of areas that we're sort of advocating, not necessarily in complete alliance with spirits, but sometimes against spirits. So, do you think there's going to be any challenges with, I guess what the beer industry wants to know is, for Queensland breweries, is there going to be sort of dollar commitments that flow into beer specifically, or is it definitely going to be something that sticks with all alcohol, artisan
How
alcohol?
much money are you going to give us is what she
Haven't been to Treasury yet, so I can't answer that question. Yes, there will be money for brewing, and there will be money.
You heard it here first, folks.
It's been recorded.
But and I know that there are, I suppose, so putting distillers and brewers together into a single basket as artisan liquor, and we are leaving wine out, I should say.
Good.
But in the context of that tourism offering, and I think this speaks to the artisan and the provenance. That, you know, if you're on a tourist trail, say on the Sunshine Coast, and you go to the meadery, I'll take it right out of distilling and wine. You go to the meadery, and then you go to Woombye Cheese, and you know, so you get a full experience of the provenance of that area, and the provision of liquor and artisan liquor is part of that overall tourism experience.
And certainly tomorrow, if anybody wants to hear my next fabulous panel, we're talking about clusters and the benefits of those and Sunshine Coast tourism and what they've done on the sunny coast there. It will be talked about, as will the South West Brewers Alliance from WA. So sort of on back to WA, John, are you able to give us an update on where that consultation process is at and what you're seeing now about what might come out next?
Sure. So the state government's funded the WA craft beer strategy, and we've appointed ACL Allen, who many of you may know, they're a national firm. They had around about 40 consultations as part of that consultancy, which they've completed the majority of it with industry. The approach we've taken is actually go to industry first, because there are issues with government agencies in the area of liquor licensing, in wastewater management. There's local government issues with health and planning, land use planning. So we want to sort of say, well, what is the vision for the industry which harmonises with government? When I say government, the elected members of the parliament.
Yep.
Okay, so where do they want to see? And we know, I've said that, they want to see food and beverage manufacturing occur. So if that's the case, what do we need to do to either change regulations if they're going to be an inhibitor to that vision? So we've got industry first, and in fact, I've got it here because it's just hot off the press. I just printed it off this morning. But the initial feedback is that they want to see economic sustainability of their businesses first and foremost, because if you haven't got that, you don't have a business, right? You can do all the ESG type stuff and that, but you need to have a financially viable business. But they are still keen, as I mentioned, we provide grants and vouchers and other forms of assistance, mostly to do with workforce development, capability development. They want to see grants continue. It's a bit of a messy space in WA. We have 9 regional development commissions across our state, which are statutory authorities. They have grants programs. They're called the Regional Economic Development Grants. They've dished out about $2 million to breweries over the last few years. We have in our department what's called the Value Add Investment Grants, and that's about helping businesses to upscale, not business as usual. If they want to expand, if they need plant and equipment, we've got grants up to $750,000. So we've again given out about $2 million there. So that's about $3.5 million, I think.
Can you just write some notes, Bill, for those numbers?
You pipe down. You'll have your turn.
It's interesting though, there is some sort of noise at the moment about are grants the right way, because we've had negative feedback on grants as well. We've had, for example, one brewery in a region might get a grant for a canning line. The one up the road wasn't quite ready at that time. Maybe in a couple of years they were going to do that. So one business has got a grant, the other one up the road hasn't got one. So is that fair? Is the market, I always think, what's the role of government? And my view is when markets or systems are failing, government intervenes and tries to do something. So I say, is the financial system failing in terms of access to funds, and do banks and other institutions, other investors provide funds? And mostly they do. It is high. I mean, Bernard Salt talked about it being a high risk area this morning.
Yep.
So we take the view it's helping to de-risk that by giving some money. We give money for feasibility assessments as well in that a stream of that. There is talk about maybe that should be moved to low interest loans. Again, especially in a high interest rate environment, maybe that's a better policy. So that whole policy discussion is actually happening at the moment. So we may or may not see the grants continue, but they're obviously very popular, because if ever you go to a meeting, and you'd know, Bill, if you're from the government, what do you got to offer me in terms of money? So that's always the first question you get asked.
Of course it is.
So it is important. So that's come back as feedback. But the strategy is also talking about tourism as well. That came out pretty big. The skills development, the TAFE type training's absent in Western Australia. Market access, it was great. I sat in on the Coles Group session just recently about how do you get into the retail, into the pubs and clubs and stadia. things like that. How do you talk and meet with these people? So some capability building in that space is probably something we need to do. The ESG space, decarbonisation of operations across the supply chain.
Yep.
Help is needed in that space, and the big one was regulation and planning. We need to actually get the regulators together around the table and say, hey, you know, what do we need to change? I mean, you need rules and laws, obviously, they're there for a reason, but you can change them if they're not working. So.
And so, Kylie, for you, think about all of the other states. What do you think is some of the biggest wins that you've seen so far as a result of strategy? I know there's been some strong investment from New South Wales government.
I mentioned the Victorian, construct, and the benefit there was we weren't being listened to just with one voice, and so the liquor alcohol industry joined up, and it was a very easy way to have a conversation. It was also a very easy way for government to say, stop all whinging at me, work together, and so that was a marriage made in heaven at the time. It also then allowed us to leverage off, as I said before. In New South Wales in particular, and I working and meeting with Bill and John, we shared this example, is the way that the New South Wales, and that is a bespoke independent plan, not just craft in general. And so the benefits that have come from that are significant in regard to their ownership. The way that they've written the plan and that they manage the plan is that each action then sits in the relevant government departments. And so all of a sudden you've got tourism resource, we've now got I think 21 beer trails in New South Wales, we've got a PR and familiarisations program under that with Destination New South Wales. There, and again, joined up work to deal with issues. So they wrote the Cert 3, it was actually written by Richard Adamson and Daniel McCulloch. And we then went, okay, now we've got a shortage of teachers to deal with the skill issue we've got, so we work with them to offer an IBA scholarship to any brewer who wanted to go through their TAE so they could teach, while we dealt with the skill migration list, and trying to tackle that skill shortage in multiple ways. That then led to working together for them to bid for the $200,000 to write the certificate for. That was successful, and that's currently being written now, that they would then be able to offer every other state. They provided us with $135,000 worth of funding to cover New South Wales brewery memberships during a year of COVID. Then we were lucky at the time to have the Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, who loved us and was a rogue when it came to process in government. So his bureaucrats hated him. We loved him because over another in-car conversation with the Deputy Premier, the IBA ended up with $200,000 to write a national plan, which is where the KPMG 10-year roadmap came from. Lots of other benefits in terms of they've written into their funding agreements with their major events that they have to supply. So Sydney Fashion Week, for example, they have to supply a certain percentage of beer as sponsors and opportunities. So it's broad, that benefit.
Cascading effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And so I'm conscious of time. I promised everybody we'd try and wrap up within half an hour. So Richard Adamson opened the conference stating that one of his biggest bugbears is the CDS scheme and the multiple state CDS schemes and what that really means at a ground level for small breweries. And so I was just wondering, selfishly wondering, whether either of the strategies are looking at, or the governments are looking at how they can also facilitate sort of recommendations around a harmonised system around CDS. Anyone who's got any knowledge of how we could get a harmonised system around CDS.
I can state that the enhanced strategy won't look at CDS. However, we do have a good relationship with our Department of Environment and Science, which is responsible for the waste policy across all waste streams, including containers. So, we maintain that relationship, and I've got to say that probably the issue that's being hit at them more at the moment is the labelling issue rather than actual container deposit legislation.
Yeah.
And how you fit everything on the one label.
Yeah, we're working on that too.
Yeah, limited real estate, yeah. So I'm not saying it's not an issue, but it doesn't seem to be, in Queensland anyway, a high profile issue.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the reason Kylie sort of started at the beginning of the session talking about why it's really important for there to be a home within the state governments for beer, because it enables, even if CDS harmonisation nationally isn't part of the strategy, it means there's somewhere for us to go and say, look, this really is a problem. Can you help work with your counterparts? And that's a great example of a topic that is coming up everywhere for us. So,
And I should say that the Artisan Liquor Advisory Group I mentioned, so that the IBA represented by Lauren Jack on that, Queensland Distillers Association, but then a range of departments. I mentioned tourism and events, environment and science, obviously ourselves, and Department of Employment, Small Business and Training, which covers TAFE, etc. So there are a range of departments around the table for that meeting as well.
and so I guess just to wrap up, how can people, or what should people in this room that want to understand more about what government's doing or get involved with government sort of in a way, what are some practical steps that you think that they can take to work more closely with government?
You're in the consultation phase.
Yeah. Look, I think, well, I can only speak for Western Australia. We do have quite a good decentralisation model. As I mentioned, we have regional development commissions. We have, myself, I live in the southwest, but I cover the state. So the great thing about COVID was that people appreciated working remotely, and it's accepted now, so we're putting more people out into the regions. But look, we've got, you mentioned the economic cluster, the South West Brewers Alliance, which has been recently established. Now that's a great forum just to meet every couple of months, and you came along to the meeting
it was great.
down in Bustleton, and we were able to really engage. And it's the same with Andy with the WA Brewers Association. In Western Australia we do have that association. It's a matter of actually people-to-people contact and keeping the lines of communication open all the time. So I think use your local groups where you can.
Chambers of Commerce.
Yeah, I'd probably echo those comments. The additional thing, Queensland being the only mainland state where more people live outside the capital city than in it, we have those population concentrations, particularly up the coast and Toowoomba. As a department, we have offices in each of those states. So while brewers might be able to come to Brisbane, there's certainly other ways of contacting our department and getting in touch.
Getting involved.
And of course we maintain good relationships with the IBA. I hope they're good. And that's why we sponsor events such as this.
Yep. Any questions?
We've got one has come through. Shakira says, from an IBA perspective, if the state government changes, is there a plan to ensure the longevity of these strategies?
Great question.
From our perspective, the relationship, as Bill and John have articulated, and I hope has come through, is established and started at quite often with the people in Bill and John's jobs, who generally, hopefully, will be around beyond a new government being in place. Yes, there's change. We've gone through that with New South Wales as an example 3 times, I think. They changed departments. The benefit of having any plan or policy adopted by government through a legislative process is it has to have another legislative process to overturn the fact that that's sitting in place. And so any negotiation or discussion that we have we'll always try and understand the process of what you're going to do with this plan as well. So it does somewhat, but if a new government comes in and they've made a promise that they don't like that because they've been lobbied by somebody that might not want that to happen, then they can quite easily overturn it and we start again. Sadly. But we keep, the same thing at a federal level. We had a very good year in the last government. We start with a very different conversation with this government federally.
I'd just add also, I think from Western Australia's perspective, we talk about a craft beer strategy, but you've got to think what's actually above that. And
Yeah.
the national
Exactly.
conversation's
Yeah.
actually about we need more manufacturing.
Yep.
In Western
Yep.
Australia, they've adopted a policy, it's called Diversified WA, a future state. So it's looking out to say, what are the industries we really need to focus on? I'm really waiting to see what happens at the federal level with the
Yep.
new, they've got this National Reconstruction Fund they're talking about.
Manufacturing.
They're talking about sort of shepherding businesses from the basic startup all the way through to big export and having a whole suite of services. So the states and the federal government need to work together on that to make sure we're not duplicating, but so that's really important.
I've got one for myself. So what I'm interested in is the support systems that makes our industry more sustainable. So things like health and safety compliance, environmental compliance, quality and food safety compliance, even things such as HR, so you've got a lot of small craft breweries and it's not viable for them to take on, fully qualified professionals that work in those areas, but full time. So is that something that the strategy is looking at as well, to kind of underpin them so that they're ready to grow and move forward, particularly around things like if they need to export and what have you?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, just looking at the feedback, the skill and capability development is actually there as an important factor. We were talking to Kylie about getting the TAFE course that's been done in New South Wales. I think that was the Cert 4. It's been Cert 3 that's been rewritten, getting that mobilised into Western Australia. I mentioned earlier there's other workshops, forums, seminars, the WABA conference each year. Those people are time poor. We're finding that we're offering sort of workshops and stuff and people are really struggling to get there.
Yeah.
But that ongoing development's important. Western Australia, we've actually just invested $10 million into a facility down near Mandurah, the Peel Food Innovation Precinct, which the Fed's put in 23 million. I think you've got a project called Turbine.
Which
Queensland, which is
Commonwealth
similar.
funding, yeah.
Similar sort of thing, but it's about engaging with the universities. We've got Murdoch University co-located. In fact, the only in the production facility in there, the only business is a brewery, Spinifex Brewery, which is set up in there. They've got the food scientists there with them. That ongoing sort of engagement and connection with universities is really important. That's a big part of what we want to do, is connect the TAFEs, the universities in with industry, and that includes the craft beer sector.
And reflect on what John was saying earlier, the bigger picture is that breweries are manufacturers, and as manufacturers they're eligible for any manufacturing assistance that we offer. So we have workshops, seminars, mentoring, all sorts of programs that breweries as manufacturers can access. So we have a craft brewery strategy, but it sits within a bigger context of assistance for manufacturing.
That's really quick, very quickly, I promise. So just from an IBA point of view, are there challenges to move forward to federal level discussions when, by our own acknowledgement, craft brewery is championed and sits under so many different portfolios in different states? Like we have our own champion, if you like, in Tassie, who's sort of is owning craft beer for us, and that's wonderful news for us, maybe finally getting some sort of strategy moving forward. But that's state growth, and then we have champions in manufacturing, and is that difficult then to sort of collectively speak at a federal level?
We do it in a similar way, Lauren, to the way that we do at a state level. So we tackle the issue. For example, please help us with excise tax debt. Please help change the framework. We respond to the administrative burden. We respond to anything that comes out as an inquiry. You would have hopefully seen the transcripts of the submission that we made to a recent parliamentary inquiry. So we tackle the issues at a level. So we deal a lot with Treasury. Previous government, we were driving them insane, saying in no policy and plan does it say the word beer. None. And so the new manufacturing roadmaps had the word beer, which meant, again, applying for federal government funding and being able to tag it back to their own strategy is very helpful. And so we deal with the issues individually. I'm working with Tourism Australia, for example, to get a beer plan more on their radar in terms of visitor experiences, while at the same time tackling the big issue, which is can you Create Beer Australia, which then a national plan comes from, and then it goes into all the departments. So it's reactive and proactive at the same time, but a fine balance, which is, you know, why Sabrina's now working with the IBA a couple of days, because, you know, I told you the level at which we're working at state and territory, so there's only so much we can do from that proactive approach when we're constantly reacting to an inquiry on CDS in South Australia, a review of a licence in Victoria, making sure that we're not missing those opportunities while doing the proactive stuff at the same time. Did I answer your question?
You absolutely did. So just a small job thing.
Just a little one.
Yeah.
So we're going to wrap it up because it's beer o'clock. But we hope what we really wanted everybody to get out of this session, I think, is an understanding of the complexities involved in advocating for us as an industry, the need to do it at all levels, local, state and federal, and the differences there might be, and then the opportunities to join them up. So hopefully you've got that information. If you want to get involved, contact your local IBA state chapter, contact your local MP, get involved with John or Bill while they're here, and really make sure that our needs are on the table. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.